Sherry and I came to Florida in 1984, and we were looking all over this area, actually. And Wellington it just kept bringing us back, because even though it was in such an infant stage that there wasn't much here, we kept thinking the potential's here. It's at some point it's going to be a great place for us to have a family and raise our kids, and as it turned out, it did. We moved in December of '84. My kids were born in 1987 and 1990, so both of them went through Wellington Elementary, Wellington Landings, and Wellington High School, because the schools kind of just opened in time for each one of them, so they never had to go outside the area compared to many of the kids before that. They had to go to schools outside Wellington. So my kids did everything in Wellington. One of the first things I got involved with when I came to Wellington was I volunteered to be a baseball coach. I'd always kind of been involved in that and always been interested in it. And when you volunteer to be a baseball coach in Wellington in 1985, you also volunteered to cut the grass and break the field and do everything, because we played on the site where the Wellington High School is now, and it was really pretty rough. It was those fields were pretty rough. I mean, you had a lot of bloody noses and black eyes from baseballs that bounced pretty crazy. But I became immersed in the community very quickly. I mean, I ended up being on the board of the Boys and Girls Club early on in the very beginning. I became active in our church, St. Michael's Lutheran Church, which was just a very little church that met over at the elementary school. Was involved with many other things in the Rotary Club. I rose to be the president of the Rotary Club in 1990, I think, and I was the president of the Wellington Chamber, I think, in 1998, maybe. It may have been later than that. I'm not sure, but anyway, I was involved in all the things in the community, and some outside the community. I got involved with the zoo, Darrell Park Zoo. I was on that board for several years because we were trying to develop more interest and grow the zoo, and Wellington had the perfect audience for it, because all these young families that were coming here, and the community just developed. It developed. I think back when we first came, the closest Home Depot was at 10th and Congress. The closest Target and Kmart were at Military and Forest Hill. And man, was it ever exciting when Kmart opened out here, and then Home Depot, and then Walmart. Those were such exciting days, because as we grew, the traffic got worse and worse getting to those places in town. But that's what we had to do. The other kind of a joke that we always used to make is, where are you going to go to dinner tonight? Cobblestones or Cobblestones? Because that was about the only choice here. Otherwise, you had to drive into West Palm Beach to find a place to go to dinner, and that's the way it was. But anyway, as time progressed, I opened Bowen Realty in 1987, and we grew that. We were one of the largest offices in Wellington for many years, actually, and then in the late 90s, as the market was strong, and I had suffered through a little bit of a health scare. I ended up selling the company, and then I came back. The history came back later in 2010, but that was kind of the things that I did. So I was very involved here in selling houses and real estate. I remember when we were in the equestrian area, I had a very good customer who was he was Egyptian royalty, but he'd grown up in France. His father had sent he and his brother and sister to France because of the political turmoil in Egypt, and he bought some lots, and he wanted to make them more accessible to the equestrian center. So with my help, he and I got that bridge put across the canal down there that gave Saddle Trail Park in Wellington access straight across to the equestrian center. That was in the early 90s. I can't remember exactly the year, but it was in the early 90s when that was done, and that changed the whole landscape in Saddle Trail Park, because all those places then became many farms because they had now access to get the horses over to the equestrian center without much difficulty. And he did a few he did actually the first biggest ones down there. I mean, I think we had the first $1 million sale actually, because he built a spec on 2 lots next to that, and we sold that, and he built a spec on the other side, and we sold that one for, I think, 1.5. The first one I think we sold for 1.2, and that was before there were any sales like that in Saddle Trail Park. Most of those houses were selling for $200,000 then, you know. So, but it changed it all because they all now became much more valuable. The lots became much more valuable, and so I participated in that growth somewhat too. And then as we move along, I guess I dipped my toes in politics for a short period. I wasn't a very good politician, but I did have the opportunity to actually oversee the building of this building that we're sitting in here, because this had been a dream until I was in office. And while I'm proud and happy I did it, it was a happy day when I got out of that. So I'm not very good at being a politician. I'm much better being a volunteer and helping out with whatever needs to be done. So it's been very gratifying, and again, I'm extremely happy with the environment that my kids were able to grow up in. I look back and I think I mentioned to somebody I started several months ago, or maybe a year ago. I sat down one day at my computer and I said, I'm going to put together in 10 pages or less a brief history of Wellington so that I can pass it on to my kids. I'm not looking to publish it or anything like that, but I think that someday my kids may want to look back and reminisce about, you know, what it was like. And with that, when I got to the end of it, I said, you know, it's amazing how close this community looks to what the dream looked like back in the 80s, 70s and 80s. At the end, it's very, very close to that dream, because I had all those real estate promotional pieces and all that kind of stuff that said, well, we're going to do this and this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And we all wondered, will it really happen? And how's it going to turn out? But when I look back at it right now, I say, it's pretty amazing how close we came to the original plan. I would like to think that I've played at least a small part in the growth and the development of Wellington. I think that there are a lot of people that played a lot of roles, and I think back of some of the names. I mean, Bink Glisson and I became very, very close friends during his lifetime, and he shared with me, all the stories from before it was even Wellington, when he and Mr. Wellington were working together. And Mr. Wellington, I mean C. Oliver Wellington. His son was Roger, so he was Roger. C. Oliver was Mr. Wellington. But that was a great opportunity that I had, being his friend and being able to do that, because I probably know a lot of things that a lot of people don't know. Whether they're all true or not, I can't tell you, but they were great stories. They were great stories, and I enjoyed very much his friendship. A lot of other people, I mean, Gary Stribling, I used to always say, and I told Gary this a couple of times, I said, I'm just amazed at how you balanced that line with the developer that you worked for and the community that you built in getting all the green space and all the things that you got here that made this community so great, because the developer had to be saying, hey, we can get 5 more lots out of there. We can get, another commercial spot there or whatever. And somehow you were able to walk that line and be able to keep them happy and still be able to end up with the community that we ended up with. So he was, and he deserves a tremendous amount of credit, I think, for what we have and what we ended up with. Guys like Dennis Quinlan, I mean, he was the construction guy. He was a great guy, and I enjoyed very much knowing and talking to Dennis over the years, because he was a wealth of knowledge. And I know you've had John Herring too. I mean, John was involved in every single thing. Everywhere I turned, John was there too. So we we did a lot of things together, and he was a great guy for the community. Did a lot of great things for the community. But there were many more. You know, there were people that are gone. Jerry Flanders, people might not remember him. Jerry was the State Farm agent here when it was the only insurance agent here. And he was extremely involved and very active in the community, did a lot of great things. A lady named Cynthia Ray, probably this is one that most people won't recognize. Cynthia Ray spent most of her career working as a private secretary for wealthy people. And for a period of time, and she actually worked for the Kennedys at one time, but for a period of time she worked for Jeremy Jacobs and the Jacobs family here in Wellington, which has been a very influential group, whether you agree with them or not. And she was on the Boys and Girls Club board, and I was chairing the finance committee, and Cynthia and Jerry were on there, and I think John Mangrum was on there maybe, I can't remember. John Mangram's another one we need to touch on. But Cynthia had the idea for the first black tie event in Wellington, the Boys and Girls Club black tie event, which still goes every year now. And that was started, I believe, in '87. And we all kind of chuckled at her when she said it. I mean, black tie event in Wellington, are you kidding me? You think we'll be able to get 50 people to come to this thing? Well, we did, and it was a tremendous success. I mean, every year for the first few years, they had this auction thing, and Bink would always do a painting, and that would always get a nice auction amount. Not for the painting, but for the fact that it was a painting he did, and so that event, she's the person that really, it was her brainchild. So she came up with it, and we did it. There are a lot of people. John Mangrum. Oh, I'll forget. You have to remind me to go back to where I was. But John Mangrum was the first pastor of the Episcopal Church here, and he also wrote a column in the Town Crier. And there's another thing we should touch on: Bob Markey in the Town Crier. John Mangrum wrote a column in there. I think it was Johnny the Stroller he wrote, and again, what a great guy. Not only a man of the cloth and a man, a very religious man that was the head of that church, but he was a very community-minded man. I mean, he was in the Rotary Club. He was in everything. He was involved with everything and most of those people in those years, in the 70s and 80s, everybody was involved in everything because you had to be to keep things going. But he was a great guy. He and his wife, Shirley, they did a tremendous amount of things for the community. And then we could move on to Markey. Bob Markey was the owner of the Town Crier, which was the first newspaper in the community, and the one that John Mangrum wrote the column for. But Bob Markey also was very influential, and again, he was a very controversial guy. I mean, he made a lot of enemies, but he had a big heart, and he loved Wellington, and he did a lot of great things for Wellington, and that paper, helped promote it, and he was a good guy too. Is there one thing that stands out in my mind as the maybe the most important thing I was involved in? I don't think I can pinpoint one. I mean, there were so many different things at the time that seemed like they were so important, and many of us were so passionate about getting done. I mean, widening Southern Boulevard. I can remember when that was 2 lanes all the way, and we had a group of people here that were just fighting like hell to get that widened because it was awful. I mean, it was a 4-way stop at 441 in Southern, and it was just awful. And I mean, that was a passionate thing. When the Boys and Girls Club, that was a passionate thing because we knew that our youth programs were very inadequate. I mean, we were just doing it on volunteers and shoestring budgets and stuff, and I think that was, many people worked really hard to get that done and build some fields that were reasonable fields to play on, and also put a program in place that met the needs of many of our youth that were maybe not as well off as people looked at Wellington as being. And so that was a passionate moment. I have to tell you, it was a passionate moment when I ran for office. I mean, it was a passionate moment because I wanted this building built, for one thing. That was one of my top things, and it was a time history when the real estate market was soft and building construction prices had come down. We owned this land, and I said, why in the hell aren't we building it? And so I was very passionate about that. I was very passionate about bringing Palm Beach State College here, and I lost on that one. You know, we didn't make it. It ended up in Loxahatchee, but it was certainly a passionate topic that I worked very hard on. Made a lot of trips to Tallahassee to try to get that done. But I don't think that any of them really were more important to me than the other. There were so many that we were, and I keep saying we because it wasn't just me. There were a lot of people that were involved in every one of those, and they weren't exactly the same group in everything that I've mentioned here, but they were, those people were passionate about whatever it was, and that's how we got a lot done. That's how we got a lot of things done, by just battling.